All right, well, good morning. Stephanie will continue to admit people in the meeting and some people might continue to come in. That's all good. Welcome to all. And yeah, what I'd like to say is that this is not a technical Alinker meeting. So please address your technical questions about the Alinker to orders at thealinker.com or via the website or call our customer service. This series is more beyond the Alinker, a systems lens on who we are in this world. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and parts can later be used by us in videos. Also keep your microphones on mute until we enter into conversations after the introductions. Once we have a conversation and you want to ask a question or share an experience, please put either your name in the chat or use the reactions button at the bottom where you can raise your hand. In the top right corner, you can select the speaker view. So if you see the speaker and the rest small, or that you see everybody and have fun with whatever view you want. And today, I welcome you from Vancouver, Canada, which is situated on the unceded traditional Coast Salish lands, including the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. Unceded means it was never surrendered, handed over, or ownership transferred. And when acknowledging this, it gives us a perspective of the situation and challenges that Indigenous people today deal with, and might invite us to show up differently than just saying it's history and Indigenous people should get over it. That's a narrative that we hear a little bit too much still on social media. I also invite you to share, if you know on which territories you are, to share from where you're calling into. And if you don't know on which lands you are, it might be good to do some research to understand on whose lands you reside. And I start with a land acknowledgement because with knowing on whose land we are, we build awareness about who we are and what we represent with the external identifiers that relate to race, sex, or abilities. What I represent with, for example, the color of my skin is contextual. And it is for me to understand how my white skin represents colonialism for Indigenous people and is representing being one of them in the company of other white people. So who I choose to be might be different than what I represent with my external identifiers. And that's a very important thing to understand. It's also a metaphor for how we are going to approach this theme of today, accessibility for all, which is I'm very excited to do this meeting and to start this series off with accessibility for all, because how accessible is our world? How accessible are we? The world is not really accessible for many people, as we know, and accessibility is not just defined by the absence of physical obstructions. Many of the obstacles to accessibility for all are actually in the ways people treat us, with their assumptions about disabilities. The non-physical obstacles are much harder to overcome or to address. So that's where I'd like to focus today on. I'm sure that many of us here have been asked inappropriate questions or got remarks that made us feel exposed, from, oh, you're so inspiring, to what happened to you? Or you look so good. And you can hear in the back of your mind, as a disabled person, you look so good. And I didn't expect that from a disabled person. These comments say more about the one saying those comments, making those comments, than the one who they're addressed to, you, but it affects us. When comments like this are made, we're forced to engage or respond. People that are different looking or differently moving are always exposed to this, to inappropriate comments that people make. Like when I go into a toilet, a public toilet, I'm always exposed to very inappropriate comments like pervert, or what are you doing? The male toilet is there. Like, I can't escape it. I'm always exposed to that. But I'd like to see it a little bit like who is exposed to that, and I actually believe it's the majority of us, because the majority of us are diverse people, and the minority is kind of what can pass as mainstream. So that's the lens that I'd like to take for today. So the first part of this meeting today is a little bit of a framing, zooming out, taking that systemic lens. And then the second part is Marjan Zief is here, who's the founder of Access Now app. And Marjan will introduce herself and give her perspective on accessibility for all, and introduce the Access Now app, which I'm really excited about. It's something that we should all use. And she will explain why. And then we can open it up for a little bit conversations about who are we in this world and how do we show up. Good so far? Any questions? We're all good? Awesome. Okay. So this is the first of 5 themed Zoom calls that we're hosting, and I initiated them because we live in a very difficult time. I think there's a need to zoom out a bit and look at it all from a different angle. The world is full of problems. Pandemic, isolation, mental illness, poverty, wildfires, floods, plastic pollution, climate crisis. We are bombarded with problems, and it's overwhelming, and it makes us feel powerless, right? Does everybody feel powerless with all that stuff going on, right? But I don't think that these problems are problems to fix. And this is the reverse design that I'd like to do. For example, mental health issues. I think we have a spiritual drought, not mental health issues. The system traumatizes us because it's not measuring in human well-being. So living in a system that is an economic system that measures in money and not in the well-being of people is traumatizing us on a daily basis. Mental health is addressing a person who has a mental health issue. Now we can feel uncomfortable and dismiss the person. When we reframe it as spiritual drought, we recognize that the system creates waste, trauma, and we can feel differently. I always say when you do not have a mental health issue in this system, there's something wrong with you. So having a mental health issue in this system actually makes you a healthy human who's crushed by a system that is not designed for all of us. And we're so trained to focus on the problems because it serves the system, it perpetuates the system, and it distracts us from looking at the system and recognizing that we're not the problem, that we have a design problem. I always look at nature, like nature is a cyclical system. It doesn't create waste, everything is regenerated. So the moment that the system creates waste, we're not focusing on the waste to try and fix it. We can recognize that we have a design problem. But this system has trained us to focus on the problems only, and we exhaust ourselves on the problems. We are conditioned to focus on the problems and to be exhausted. And that's exactly how the system perpetuates. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, who are we in a world that is not designed for all of us equally? And maybe this is a good time to introduce Marjan. And Marjan Zief is here, a long-standing friend of mine, and I'm so happy that you join us, Marjan. And please introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, B, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this gathering. It's really wonderful to have a chance to see some of your faces and connect. For a bit on me, I'm based in Toronto, and I am a person with a disability. I was born with my disability, and I have used a wheelchair throughout my life. And a few years ago, I started working on just ways to solve my own problem. I was just really frustrated with the lack of accessibility information around me, really frustrated with going places and being stuck outside because I didn't have access to the front door, or I didn't, have any information that would let me know that when I would arrive at the event, I'd have to go through the back and through the garbage entrance and up the narrow ramp or whatever the case is. And so I just, you know, I had so many of these experiences throughout my life that I just one day decided I wanted to be part of a solution. And that's really what led me on the journey to building my own company, which is called Access Now, and would love to have a chance to share with you a little bit further on in the conversation today about what I've done. But I've connected with B through just the world of entrepreneurship and, you know, being two people focused on removing barriers for our communities. It became very clear that we had a lot of shared interests and themes. And so I'm thankful to B for inviting me to be here and looking forward to also getting to know some of you as well.
And Mayan, can you say a little bit about what accessibility for all means for you? Like who is all, and how do you see that?
Yeah, you know, I'll say that even in my own thinking before I started building my own company that was focused on accessibility, even my own understanding of accessibility was limited. And I think that that's also just interesting in itself, that people assume that because I sit on a wheelchair, that I just know this stuff. And I only knew my experience. I only knew for me what accessibility meant. And that was kind of my limited understanding and definition. It was mobility based, it was wheelchair accessibility, it was the specifics that I needed. And so when I would, you know, ask people about accessibility, I was expecting them to give me answers about ramps and elevators, and because that's what I needed. But in even just building Access Now, which is very community driven, I've also learned that accessibility is defined differently depending on who you are. For example, I remember I was in a conversation. I was kind of presenting Access Now to a group, and someone said, you know, as a little person, accessibility to me is the difference in height count, in counter heights. And it's the ability to even meet people at eye level if I'm, you know, going somewhere and have an opportunity to sit on a chair that I can even reach. So, you know, there are different ways in which people associate accessibility in the built environment, for one, which is definitely what I focus on the most, is removing barriers outside the world, outside of ourselves, our identities. But then, you know, B is, as you've kind of mentioned, and I think it's a really important theme, is that there's also kind of just this invisible form of accessibility, you know, the barriers or the stigma or kind of these invisible pressures that people apply to people who are different than them. And that becomes a limiting factor to, let's say, me reaching my full potential. You know, and I think to me, that's what accessibility is. It's about kind of the awareness and recognition that when we invest in removing barriers, we empower people to reach their full potential. And that actually has nothing to do with, you know, a disability that you have or a gender or religion. It's really just about recognizing that, you know, people need different things, and the more intentionally inclusive we are, the more accessible those experiences and services are.
Mm-hmm. And living in a system that creates inaccessibility for a lot of people, just as a thought here, how many people would in our world, how many people would experience inaccessibility?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, just a thought. Like how many people is that? I mean, we know that 20% of the overpopulation, 1 out of 5 people lives with disabilities, visible or non-visible. But women don't have access to a lot of in our world because of how the system is set up. People of color, indigenous people don't have access to a lot of things gender weirdos like myself are scrutinized by bad comments in public spaces all the time. And so the world is inaccessible for the vast majority of us. I always wonder, like, why are we identifying with all the minorities that we are put in? Because it feels, being in a minority feels like we're small, we're powerless. And I think that's benefiting the mainstream that just wants to, you know, perpetuate an economic system that measures in money. But I think the vast majority of us actually experiences inaccessible places, mindset, inaccessible world. So who are we in this world, being in those minorities, and looking at, like, why don't we turn it around? And what is happening inside of us? Who are we when we're trained by the world to think that we fit in a minority and we're not worthy, and we're not, you know, worthy to be included? And so I think that the language is sort of backwards always. It's an inaccessible world for most of people because the motivation is different than having a world that is accessible for all of us equally. Does that make sense to everybody? So I would like
Ellen had her hand up.
I did.
Sorry.
I was just gonna put something in the chat. May I say something?
For sure.
I'm maybe a little bit older, and I grew up in a crazy time during the 1960s, and even a little earlier than that. But the message when I was growing up was not one of minorities, but one of inclusiveness, and the fact that we're all judged, or we all should be. Our blood is the same color, no matter what you look like or what you feel like or who you are. We are all one. I believe the public message has changed over time. And this move towards individualism and towards separating us is, I believe, it's not only cruel and unkind, it's dangerous for a peaceful society, because we have to look at what our commonalities are. And I would really hope, I mean, I've been very drawn to Alinker. I became a paraplegic from a car accident on my way to work. I was 37 years old. So I'm an ambulatory paraplegic. So my world changed upside down, inside out. However, I have found that living on the side, choosing the side of being a part thereof and not separating myself off, has been more helpful for me emotionally. And I would suggest, rather than looking at our separateness, we look at, as a community, what binds us together, our common, whether we have a common history, a common tragedy, a common happiness, your beautiful glasses. I'm crazy for your glasses. I wanted to know where I could buy them, but that we, in fact, even in the disability community, had a voice to change. We are, I mean, your skin color should not, at this point in time, be a barrier to life. It just shouldn't. We should, we have to look at this inner strength. And yes, I'm very white. I have my own problems being very white. I can't stay in the sun. I get skin cancers. I
agree with you.
Yeah,
Ellen,
maybe we can lead a conversation, because we all are different and our disabilities are all different and we struggle all differently, that we could lead the conversation that really we're all the same, or that we need to find that space that we share.
But this is the difference between what we represent with our skin color, how we move, gender characteristics.
It's got to start somewhere. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yes, we can choose it. We do not have to be victims any longer of anybody else's.
I agree. But the thing is, we are living in a system that measures and that treats us based on our external characteristics. I agree,
Right.
and this is exactly why we
You don't have to accept it though internally for you. And so far as I mean, these issues are pervasive. They're forever issues. It's no different today than it was 5,000 years ago, really.
So perhaps it's not either or, but both and.
Yes.
Good points.
But the framing why I started those conversations is to get us to, like, who are we, becoming aware of what the system is, and from where we can choose who we want to be. And this is never the question that is posed to us when we grow up. Like, it's always what you want to be. What is your career path that you're choosing, as if that determines who you are. But many people are conditioned and just behave as if they are, as how they are conditioned, and do not get to the question who I am and how I want to show up in this world. And this is exactly the path that I want to explore in those Zoom meetings, to go into not trying to fix the world outside of us, but who are we? And who do I choose to be? I do still need to be aware of what I represent with the white skin color, because for Indigenous people, I do represent colonialism. I need to be aware of that. That is a trigger. But it doesn't need to determine who I am, because I choose to be somebody else. I choose to be a kind person.
Right, and it doesn't
But
need to define who they are either. I say this attitude of inclusive belongs to all of us. We all have a responsibility to find a safe space to live on this earth together. And and if your ancestors were oppressors, you choose not to be. You can't fix what was. We can only fix going forward. And the constant mashing of what was, we can't fix it. At some point, psychologically, we have to let it rest and say, we can do better, and we are doing better, we will do better. So I mean, I understand.
The problem
I'm
here,
older than you. So
perhaps we can see all this as food for thought.
Yeah, that's all.
Food for thought, because nothing applies, everything does not apply to everyone. There are differences. I'm really curious about access and how that might benefit us.
Mm-hmm. I want to say one more thing about it's not history. People live with it every day, Indigenous people, and it's not history, and it cannot rest. And it takes us to show up differently to make sure that we represent something else than what our ancestors did to Indigenous people. And this is a very important thing. It's not history that can just rest. It cannot.
And I'd like to just emphasize what you're saying there. You can't just forget the past and what was done to people, because if we don't acknowledge it and we don't recognize it and don't honor pain that people have gone through, discrimination, and being white, there is, like, we haven't felt that pain. We don't really know what that is. So I agree that there has to be reconciliation, acknowledgement to move forward. I understand where you're coming from by saying bury it, but for so many people, you just can't bury that. And we have to acknowledge it. Even though we didn't do it, we have to acknowledge what happened and what's still happening now, and then move from there.
Every Indigenous person is a survivor, directly or indirectly, of residential schools. Every Indigenous person alive today is a survivor of residential schools system. We live with that every day. And by representing that, I feel the burden of that. I might not have done that personally, but I feel the burden of the land that I live on and how we move forward to be a best ally for Indigenous people, so that we create more accessibility for also, like, that the world, the wellness of people includes all of us. Going back to, and this is a very interesting topic, and we'll get to the second Zoom meeting is actually the essence of allyship, and it will go more into the Indigenous issues and values in the world that we live in, and how that all works. That's the second Zoom call on the 2nd of March. And then I want to honor the question of Sarah Newman. who said, I'd like to know a little bit more about the Access Now app. Is that what you're asking, Sarah? To get Mayan to introduce the Access Now app?
I was just going to say that I'd be very happy to contribute to the conversation regarding allyship and allyship in that discussion. So perhaps at the next meeting.
Yes, fantastic. Mayan, could you share your screen and show us all what the Access Now app is? Because that's something I really think that we should all use. And Mayan will explain why that is beneficial, retrospective as well, actively.
Sure. So kind of picking up where I was kind of just ending my share. What I realized, and kind of we've all been touching on it right now as well, is that everybody's perspective is different, and that every person has their own lens on how they see the world and what they experience and what they define as a barrier. And so initially, my goal was to create a platform that really just showed what I thought was a barrier and invited other people to do the same. And so I live in Toronto, and so I invited a few of my friends to start sharing places in their own community that they went to. So my friend Gabby, she added, her hair salon. She said, oh, you got to check this place out. They're really nice. They moved the chairs out of the way. I can drive in with my wheelchair. Really great customer service. So I learned about a new hair salon. And, I remember a few of my other friends started sharing. And then eventually we got to the point where we had like maybe 300 places in Toronto that now we knew about, some of which I'd known, some I didn't, about, how accessible those were to my friends and how some of those criteria were also accessible to me. And so that was the beginning stages of Access Now. And what we developed, which I'll share my screen, is a mobile app and a website that allows people to basically do exactly that, to share and discover. I'm just going to move this so that I can see you all at the same time. Okay. To share and discover all kinds of accessibility. So what I've put up on the map right now is kind of a zoomed in place. I just want to make sure that I can really see you and everything. Sorry, guys. I don't love sharing screen at the same time. All of the places in this little intersection in Vancouver where people have added information. So we can find out that there's an accessible parking spot, or that, the washroom has a button on the door to actually enter. And, you can see the reviews that Wheel and D, who was there, shared, the button at the entrance. These are things that were important to him. But anyone could go in and add more information. And then when you zoom out, and this is just, like one area in Vancouver, you start to get a picture of like all of the hundreds and hundreds of places that people have shared information about. So, all different types of things, from restaurants to places that are less accessible and why, and people really have gone into detail to explain what about the spaces work for them and don't work for them. And one of my favorite functions of the app is the filter. This is where I spend my time kind of deciding from a menu, what are the options that I require in a certain neighborhood. And then when I've just selected a few, all of a sudden we get a very different, view of this intersection here. And now there's like just a few stores that are still accessible to me and give me enough information to understand why. But I think it's quite powerful because, I in the context of this meeting, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about filter, because filter was an afterthought. First, we built this map, and then I'm going to stop sharing for a little while so I can still see you, because it takes over my screen. But please feel free to go to accessnow.com or map. Thank you for sharing the link in the chat. You can also download it. It's on your phone, mobile phones, if you want, to just access it anytime. Perfect. I love that some of you have already done that. And so really the idea is the more the merrier. If you are going places and experiencing both the positive or the negative, in regards to accessibility, you could share that from your own perspective, and it helps create, that sense of community, as well as really just creates visibility of what is accessible. And yes, it is in the UK. So today we're in 35 countries. We have active communities across Canada and the US, as well as in England and in Australia. Those seem to be the spaces that were most active. But then, we've seen people all of a sudden go on holiday to the Caribbean and start to map all the places that they visit on their holidays. So it's kind of cool to see, how people take Access Now with them. And that's the mission, is just for us to create visibility and, most importantly, create transparency. And so, I grew up in a world where everyone told me that we're working on it and we want to make things accessible. And, I'm a 90s baby. So the accessibility, the Americans with Disabilities Act had just started in the US, and that started to change how people talk about accessibility, but there weren't any results. I didn't feel it. I couldn't experience this intention to be accessible. I just wanted results that could help me live my life. So the idea behind the platform is just, if we all contribute instead of waiting for people to do it for us, we just actually end up making our lives easier. And to Bee's point, not such a minority when every person on the planet contributes and creates something that's, visible and transparent for the world. So hopefully it can be useful to you. We just started mapping trails and parks as well. And I know that many of you are very avid kind of outdoor users of the Alinkers. So, you can check out some of the accessible trails we have on Access Now as well. And if there are any, pieces of feedback or things that you'd like to see more of on the platform, first of all, you're free and invited to share anything you want there. Anyone can create an account and just go and start adding. But if you have any kind of, things you want to share with me or anyone from the team, we'd love to hear from you, because that's how we build. It's completely community driven.
That's awesome, Mayan. And there's a question, somebody says, how do businesses get listed? I'd love to have clients with accessibility be listed.
Yes. So businesses, so anyone can map a business. If you are a customer or a business owner, you can go ahead and map a business. But we also then do have partnerships with businesses directly who are looking to kind of share more information about their services or their experiences directly on the app as well. So we kind of work with everyone, and that's the goal. We want to work with everyone. And so hopefully I answered that question. But yeah, if you have more you want to learn, happy to share as well.
And Andrew says that he saw you on CBC, and thank you for your leadership and contribution and sense of humor. Sense of humor is awesome, as always. I would like to open it up. Also, no, I'd like to acknowledge what just happened, actually, because with your comment, Ellen, we have an Indigenous woman on our team who got really hurt by what you said. And if we, hang on, don't be reactive. Just don't be reactive, because that's not helping. If we want to choose who we are and choose to be kind people, we need to understand what the things that we say, how it affects other people. And I just wanted to pick that back up, because it's not okay. to say those things. It's
I
really not. It hurts people.
apologize. I don't know what I said that was. I apologize. Please accept my apology because I'm unaware of what I said. My meaning was to be, we are together, not that we haven't suffered, but that we are together and we share each other's pain. I'm sorry that I misspoke or spoke unclearly. I don't see where she said what was said. So, I mean, I apologize.
Let's not rehash that. I
Yeah,
just wanted to notice that. And if we show up as kind people, we need to understand the context of which we are.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we are not equal, Ellen, in this world. That's the thing.
Oh,
we can want to be equal and we can want to be differently, but we are not. This is not a kind world. Okay.
I didn't experience anyone being unkind, but I did hear differences of opinions. And I think that's important.
Absolutely important. I agree with you. And we don't need to agree with each other, but it has to be based in respect for each other and understanding the context of where somebody else is, what is respectful or not respectful for people. And
sometimes that's in the eye of the beholder.
Yes. And kindness is a really difficult practice in a world that is so divisive and so detrimental for so many people. It is really hard to be kind, but it is a practice that constantly needs our attention. I'd like to shift to a conversation about how do we uphold an inaccessible world. For example, every time, and I use my own example, every time I go as a gender weirdo to a toilet, I get called out or called names or stuff, and I can't escape that. Every time I come home and something happened like that, I don't have the response yet to hold my own and to not be affected. It affects me when somebody says pervert. It's like, what, like, what? Why can I not just go and that? So I don't have my response, so it impacts me. And then what happens is that I beat myself up for not having responded in the right way. So it hurts me double. It hurts me when the person says that, and it hurts me when I beat myself up. That, I think, is an sort of the internalized ableism of this world that we live in. And so this conversation, I'm hoping to explore how we can show up for ourselves in the first place with people making inappropriate comments. For example, I go to a supermarket and somebody says, you can't take this bike in here, you know. And it's like, well, there's a few things that is possible. One is like, are you really asking me if I'm disabled? Because that would be an inappropriate question. And that's an illegal question actually to ask that. And I might want to see your manager because you're asking very illegal questions. The internalized ableism, as we are conditioned to behave in a certain way to not feel worthy, can also be, yeah, but here's my disability pass. I'm really disabled. And this is, you know, I'm defending ourselves. And the defensiveness actually implodes and makes us feel less worthy because we're still reactive to the system that makes us feel less or not welcome or not seen. So maybe we can bring up situations and explore how you respond and how we can respond, holding our own and putting the onus on the person who says things rather than having that affect us. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Who has an example of being rejected somewhere or being inappropriately asked certain things, and how do you respond, and how can we redefine that into a different response that affects us maybe less, but becoming aware of what we do versus how we are reactive to what the system wants us to do. And Sergio is one of our team members, and we sort of had this conversation in the team as a sort of preparation for like, what is that conversation going to be? How can we explore how we uphold the ableism of the system, or how we can show up differently? So Sergio, maybe you want to share a little bit about what you shared in the team meeting, that example, and that might trigger more conversation.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good Thursday. Yes, I think it doesn't happen like a lot throughout the week, but I think being a wheelchair user and being maybe as active as I am, it might be just a little bit odd that I'm able to do a lot of things. And this week, on Tuesday night, one of not that it matters, but just that I mentioned it, a girl cousin at night, her car broke down and she did not know what to do. So I love cars my entire life. Even prior to my injury, I've worked in cars. I'm very active. So she called me. She's like, I don't know what to do. My car broke down, but please come help me. So I get there, I revise the car, I'm checking the car, and it's the battery. So okay, I'm like, look, I'm not gonna be able to, it's too heavy and it's kind of weird. So I can do things, but I obviously might need help. So that I can do it, just get the battery, and by the time you get here, everything will be ready. I think you guys can probably feel the same, but sometimes you can see people sensing, like you can sense people watching you or doing things. So I saw this pickup truck just there, just kind of, and I was, and then he pulled, like a couple of minutes, 10 minutes after, he just kind of went around, and then he pulled up, and he was like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine, just working on the car. And he was like, oh, so what happened? Like he saw me that I was like, yeah, like what? And he kind of said, like, what happened? But you know that happened question is not what I'm doing, what am I doing? It's just like, what happened to me, right? Like the wheelchair, like what happened to me? And then I was just like, so I just took a breath, and instead of me saying like, yeah, usually I had a motorcycle accident, but I have given many other occasions, many other different things. But at this time, I think that, like B was saying, is taking the time to actually just breathe in and just be like, either ask him a question like, what happened to the car? Oh no, and that's what I did. I changed it. I had to get personal, which I didn't want to, but I was, what happened to the car? No, just, it's interesting. My girl cousin actually broke down. She needs help. So I know work on cars, and I'm doing it, but I don't know if you want to help, but I'm fine. She's gonna bring the battery, and then we'll be out. And the guy was kind of like I did not know, I did not mean that, but okay, thank you, have a great day. So it was just the look and the sense, and I think some of you probably can sense that. So I've been doing that lately, and it has definitely changed the way I feel about those occasions and the way they react. Because I think in that sense, they can maybe in the future say like, oh, okay, I might want to perhaps approach a person in a wheelchair different. But it was an occasion that it was funny. It was funny.
But you changed it around from being defensive and explore and exposing yourself in vulnerability in personal stuff that is nobody's business. They're not even friends of yours. To like, yeah, the car broke down and I'm fixing the battery because that was actually happening. And that's a beautiful way to put it back to that person that will now think like, shit, what was that question that I asked that guy, and what was in me, without the confrontation, but it sort of gives a different frame. And I think deflecting it and putting it back to the one who asked that question, making them think about their right, about their assumptions. About
yes. So my thing is, I mean, not necessarily that I'm looking for them to feel the same way, but it's just for them to have that thought, like, maybe that question was awkward, maybe that question was inappropriate. So,
Mhm.
and not necessarily that you're not willing to answer, it's just not the time and place.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Who else has an example of getting an inappropriate question, or how you and how you respond to that, and how we can maybe explore to respond to that differently, to hold your own? And Beate, you have your hand up. Do you want to step in? You're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay,
There we
yep,
go.
got it. Yeah, it's kind of, there's so many things that happen, and I think you have to read the person or the situation, and based on that, my responses are different. Because if there's a person, I get the old, well, what happened to you? You know, thinking, did I have a hip replacement or a knee? So again, if it's like an older gentleman asked me that recently, because he himself was using a walker because he just had a hip replacement. So he was making an assumption, but was very polite, like didn't shout it out or anything. And so that was fine. So then I explained, because I have two issues. But then the funny thing that happened was it became a one-upmanship. Oh, my brother has this and my sister has this. And then I felt uncomfortable, and I just said, okay, I've got to get going. I've got things to do. And then if it's other people who ask you out of the blue, like they're a stranger, I just, at the beginning, I would try to explain. Now it just takes too much out of me.
Mhm.
So I just don't say anything.
Mhm. But the thing is that those inappropriate questions, they're people that don't know you. They ask very personal questions, and that's none of their business.
Mm,
So sometimes I say back, like, we're not even friends.
mm,
Like, you don't ask those friends. Like, it takes a relationship before you start talking, asking personal questions. Like, what's going on? Anybody else has a response to that? Or Mayan, how do you respond to questions like? Because I'm sure you get those questions too.
I definitely do. I would say that it's like a practice. Then I think I want to say that in general I get better at it, but then I know that also it really depends on the day. If I'm having a really hard day and there's a lot going on, my patience is limited in terms of how much capacity I have to hold myself and stop and remind myself that person might just not know, or that person hasn't had an opportunity to be educated. The kind of the way that Sergio explained in his story. So I think, I'm similar in terms of I try to navigate the intention, and if I feel safe, I might answer if it feels appropriate. For example, when a little kid comes up to me, says, "What happened to you? Why are you in that thing?"
Mhm.
They're just genuinely curious, and they want to understand, why is she sitting in a wheelchair? And what I find even interesting about those instances is where parents are often grabbing their kid and saying, no, don't ask, don't look, don't talk to them. And it's a moment where, as a little kid, this person who's just forming their ideas about the world is now told that disability is awkward and uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And is told, like, we don't even talk to them, we don't ask those questions. And then that kid grows up and they're like all of a sudden driving a pickup truck and seeing Sergio fixing a car, and they have no idea what to do. And so I think, sometimes there is a moment where we can recognize that we have a role, whether we want that role or not, because we have an opportunity to educate. We don't have to choose it every time, but we have a choice when we feel it's right to advocate, to educate, and to help people realize that it's okay. And I think, you know, when I answer the little kid who's asking what happened to you, and I say, well, you know, I was born with muscles that are not as strong as yours. So I use it. Well, okay, simple, very simple concept, very well understood. And then I also see the parents' response and they go, oh, like that went fine. That's okay. So I think, you know, it's really about, it's very personal and it's really situational, but I think when you are considered the other, whether you like it or not, you will always go through the world navigating these external forces. And it's when you choose to show up and say, I want to make those different, that you become from a, you know, a passerby to an activist. You don't have to be one every day.
Exactly. Laura?
I have to echo what Mayan said. My husband is a below the knee amputee, and 4 years ago, a young child saw us in Niagara Falls, and he's 5. Says, "Oh, look at that!" And the parents grabbed him and said, "Shush!" They didn't want to talk, and the child's old enough to know what transformers are. And he says, "Well, yeah, I'm like a transformer." So he was able to educate the child, and oh yeah, okay, no biggie, you know, went on with his day. But the parents, God, it was so sad. I was more caught up in the parents' reaction.
Kids are less conditioned yet. And the parents who are more conditioned pass that conditioning on to children and make them scared for disabilities, or, you know, make that the others and stuff. So yeah, kids are a beautiful portal to get things talked about in a way that is not inappropriate. Kita, you got your hand up.
I just wanted to add that I actually didn't even realize that it was, and I apologize for my ignorance. I'm a parent as well. I have MS. I'm currently don't have the mobility issues, but I had the I guess I had the opportunity to meet Bea last week, and she told us about this event. But I actually didn't even realize that these were inappropriate questions, because I think for me it would have been just more of a curiosity what happened, and now I think I'll be more aware of it. But I have had incidents where my son has seen someone in a wheelchair, and it is kind of awkward. But I remember my son being like, there was a lady, I think she was in chapters, and she had her, my son's obsessed with cars, and so this lady was driving around in her, she had an electric wheelchair, and he loved it. He thought she was so cute, and you know, and they actually started talking, and and I kind of held back just to observe what was happening with them, and I didn't pull him back and say don't ask and stuff like that. But it's good to be more aware, and I do think that there is a lot of awareness that needs to be around this topic. And I can understand having MS myself. It's not as visible, but I can understand how it can be offensive. Like with other things like fertility, there's all these other questions that people are saying, don't talk about, don't ask people when they get married if they're going to have kids, because that's inappropriate. And now having that awareness of these type of questions in this scenario, and I can understand how it can be frustrating for someone who has to reiterate their response, and you know, depending on the day, they may not want to talk about it and stuff. So
and it goes down to what the body looks like to who you are. Like if you just focus on Mayan's body, you'll never find out she's a stunning entrepreneur that made a kick-ass app.
Yeah.
And so focusing on who we want to meet is different than focusing on what we have and focusing on, you know, what's wrong with you, because clearly something is wrong with you. And that diminishes the person who is also an incredible entrepreneur and all the rest that she does.
Yeah.
You know, so we're so used to measuring on the outside external characteristics that it takes out the human experience, the connection.
Yeah.
Richard, you have your hands up, and then Sarah. Yes, unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, my husband, Richard, here, he has MS. So we use a scooter. He uses a scooter. And it's interesting how you've brought this up, because the inappropriateness of questions, what we found is that a lot of times it's almost like it brings out a compassionate gene in people when they see that you have a disability. And so your question about how you're portrayed to the world sort of reflects what people see of you in themselves. So your issues, when you say you go into a washroom, that what you're getting back from people is their paranoia, their phobias, etc. But when someone asks, like little children, about a wheelchair, because you said people ask inappropriate questions, but when a child asks it, it's not inappropriate. So I find we often interact with people like their children. So when they look at you and say, oh, you know, that's a really cool scooter. We have a really interesting adult mobility scooter that folds up like a transformer and it comes apart. And we've met so many people with that, kind of like the Alinker. We just got the Alinker. But we more approach it that it's almost like sometimes the good in people come out when they see someone who's disabled, and it allows them to say things that they wouldn't otherwise say. And that's not in all situations. So different, you know, the challenges of Indigenous people, the challenges of Black people, that's not the same as sometimes the challenge of people in a wheelchair. I don't think it is anyway. I could be wrong, but we just noticed that quite often people are curious, and if you're open to it, like you were saying, Mayan, about almost feeling like you have to educate them. So opening the door for them to feel comfortable to ask those questions and not feel like they're being inappropriate. It's different if they're very rude about it or if they're really inquisitive, but oftentimes people they just want to know. And it is a good opportunity to make them realize, well, no, he can have a conversation, right? You can have a conversation and interact. So that's, I guess it's just a different perspective on it. I'd be curious on your thoughts as well on that.
Maybe you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to respond. And then unfortunately, I'm going to have to drop off at 3 because it's my time. It's 3 o'clock here. And so I'm going to have to leave. But what I will say is that, I think you bring up a really interesting point, because unlike a lot of different kind of identities that people may carry, first of all, disability is universal and anyone can join the community, or the population rather, at any time. But more than that, also, I think that disability, whether you like it or not, presents sometimes a form of vulnerability that other people recognize. And vulnerability is an interesting thing because it does allow for honesty. It allows for people to shed layers and bring people closer in. And that's how you build authentic relationships with people. And I always find this very, very fascinating. Even like if you look at romantic relationships, it takes time for people to become vulnerable. And once they are, they're able to really connect. I am presented as vulnerable to people when they meet me. I might not be physically strong. I can't defend myself the way other people can. And for some people, that's alarming and scary. And they think, oh, that's a weakness. I think it's a strength. I think if you know how to hone in on and recognize your vulnerability, what you're saying about it bringing people to you and attract kindness and invite people into a conversation that's more authentic and more meaningful, it takes people who are non-disabled sometimes entire lifetimes to understand that concept. I don't have a choice. I was brought into the world this way. I have to learn it from a very young age. But, to Bee's point about how do you flip the narrative? How do you represent what you carry as part of your identity as a strength and help people learn that along the way. So those are my final thoughts. I'm going to leave you with that. And I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you, Bea, and thank you all. It was a pleasure to meet you and hear from some of you. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can do that straight through the Access Now website, or you can find me on social media. Wherever there is social media, I am to be found, except for TikTok. I'm not really active there yet.
Oh, me neither,
So
me neither.
I will learn. I know I've got some work to do there. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Mayan. And you're awesome. And we'll be more engaged with each other as we're really trying to get every Alinker user to map out what they're doing on Access Now and see how Mayan and I can develop maybe the app a little bit more to make it more Alinker specific. We're exploring that. So more on that through the newsletters. Thank you so much, Mayan. Have a great day. And for everybody else, you can stay here a little bit. We'll run a little bit late. If you need to go, please feel free to go. But there's one how beautifully Mayan said that, that vulnerability is in fact the way that we connect. I said years ago, I dream of a world where dismissed people are the leaders to tomorrow, because people that are dismissed or confronted by life, as I say it, they actually know a little bit more about life. But in this society, the people that know a little bit more about life because they had to learn who they are in this world, confronted by, a system that didn't include them, us. Because we had to reinvent ourselves, we know a little bit more about life. So why are those people dismissed? It's beyond me. And in the vulnerability of who we are as humans is the only way that we can connect with each other. But I think the whole psychological thing is underneath there too. People are uncomfortable around disabilities because they feel that, oh, that can happen to me too. And then who am I? And in the divisive way that, the separation of the disabled there and the not disabled here, it has become a scary place. So how can we show up to make it a less scary place? Because we're all disabled, just not yet. But unless we drop that immediately, we're all going to be disabled. Like starting with cool glasses, but that's a disability. I'm fucking blind when I don't have those glasses on. So, disability is everywhere. And the vulnerability is the way to connect with each other. So how do we get to the comfortable place with each other? And Sarah has her hand up. What did you want to say, Sarah?
I just wanted to say that, yeah, I agree with that. I think we are all connected. And I think that in a way, and I agree that we are all or potentially could become disabled. I think that where it is very, very different though, between ourselves and, for example, Indigenous and people of color and Black people and white people, is that we are not in danger of losing our white privilege. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. I don't think it's the same thing as not being white. So I always think that we have to remember, it's not about one-upmanship. It's only that we do have to remember these things as allies. And I think that is really important. That's something next week. But I think that, again, these are ways that we can connect. When we connect, in connection, there's always an awareness of difference. And that makes our connections more strong, right? In order to make a really strong link, the first thing you have to do is really sand down the points of disconnection. And then you can connect them very well when you solder them together. But that you have to really make them rough first. And I think that's really really important. But what I was going to say about my own experiences with disability, because I have a genetic issue that requires me to move with the Alinker, but also forearm crutches. But I also have brain injury. So before I needed mobility aids, first the forearm crutches, and then I got my Alinker. With brain injury, I had invisibility disability, and I would be wordless and in public places and needing help. And as soon as I would try to speak, it would be obvious that I was quite severely disabled. And it would be very alarming for people around me, and they would get very uncomfortable and would say as much. And there would be cashiers saying, "I can't deal with her," to my face, but speaking to someone else. And I would remind myself the expression, never attribute malice to what can be attributed to stupidity, but not have the words for that, you know, because until you're in the position that there's also, you know, when people cannot see that you are disabled, and then they're shocked to realize that you are disabled. And then when I had to wear forearm crutches all the time, I suddenly had a visual disability, and it freaked people out, especially kids, even though they had curiosity. Why do you have to use those? And again, the things that everybody discussed. Now with the Alinker, the kids are finding it so cool. I'm spending all the time fielding cool questions. And then the question, can that legitimately be in here? But it's funny how it shifts at each stage. And almost always it's a matter of at what level is that person able to enter into empathy? And at what point does it frighten them? And that point of fear is their point of disengagement. Fear or shame. And shame is the big factor in disengagement, I think, in terms of white privilege.
For sure.
Anyway, those are just a few things I just wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful for further framing too. Because in the, you know, the white privileges, we are in a system that is a white supremacist system that has characteristics, and some of those characteristics come in all those conversations, like the othering. It's us and them. It's wrong or right. It is the right to comfort is, I think, I recognize that everywhere. The right to comfort. How dare you confront me with disability, because I have the right to be comfortable in my invincible state of being. And so, right. And then that leads me to the next thing that we haven't talked about yet. But if somebody says to like, oh, that's so inspiring, you're so inspiring, which I think is masking the discomfort, because what they're actually thinking or what they're actually feeling is like, you really make me uncomfortable. I don't know how to show up. I don't know if I should do this. So I cock out and say like, you're so inspiring. What I do when people say that to me is like, so what is that leading to? Inspiration leads to something, right? So what is that leading you to do? And they're like, what? And I said, yeah, because, and again, putting the onus on them, not like, you're so inspiring. And they're like, oh crap, there we go again. How do I respond? on that one, I now have a response. And so like, what does it lead you to do? Because if you're inspired, then clearly you're inspired to do something. Tell me. And then there's never an answer. There's very big discomfort, but it's sort of putting that discomfort back to them. It's like, I'm not inspiring. I just go about my life. I'm just doing what I need to do, and trying to do the best that I can do that with the body that I have in this setting. Does anybody else have that comment, like, or annoyance maybe, when people say like, you're so inspiring? What happens then? How do you respond?
Yeah, I have that happen. And my immediate internal response is, stop it. But my external response is usually just, to say, there's nothing inspiring. I'm just living my life. You have your problems, I have mine. Mine happen to be visible. Yours maybe aren't.
And it forgoes on the fact that that they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of masking, I think, of discomfort.
I never thought about that, B. I'm really glad you mentioned it, because we get that a lot. Because before we had before Alinker, but this other device that we had, I had a wheelchair and I attached a little motor on it that I found in the UK, because it's hard to move scooters around if you want to travel, the heavy scooters. And so I'd rig it all up and carry all the gear and everything. And we'd get that a lot. People would say, oh, it's so inspiring. And I always found it uncomfortable. And I never really understood why, because I didn't think it was that big a deal. It's just kind of like somebody carrying a lot of groceries, or, what. And we've had that a lot over the years. Oh, it's so inspiring. And I'm so glad you said that, because I've never known how to respond to that. And it's bothered me, because I don't think there's anything at all inspiring. We're just kind of getting on with life. So I'm glad you brought that's really interesting food for thought. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we have those conversations, because you might hear something that's like, oh, I never thought about that. That could be a way to respond to that. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We're 10 minutes over, or 12 minutes over. Is there anybody else who wants to say something? And otherwise, we're going to close. Everybody happy? Good. Very nice to see you all. Have a fantastic day. We'll be in touch. And on the 2nd of March, we have the second Zoom call like this. It's more like an interactive conversation about uncomfortable things, but we need to have uncomfortable conversations to get to the essence and to truth. So I'm very happy to host uncomfortable conversations. And I hope to see you all on the 2nd of March in that. In the second, the essence of allyship will have a full focus on Indigenous values, Indigenous people, and who we are in relation to Indigenous people. So hoping to see you all there. And thank you for being here, and get on the app, the Access Now app. Talk to you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, B. That was
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you for hosting. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.